I'm Alan Wardus, and this is Think Radio Presents Think Business. My guest today is entrepreneur Karen Hoskin.
When I was getting into rum early in my life, it was not a thing. Nobody that I knew was excited about rum. I literally didn't know of any pundits or, folks that were well known in the rum world. It was really hard back then to get a decent rum in the United States. So my passion for it developed much through my own travel.
Welcome to another great conversation on Think Radio.
Think Business is made possible by funding from the ICE Lab at Western, supporting innovative business in the rural Southwest.
If you like Think Business, then I know you'll enjoy the other shows in the Think Radio Presents family of podcasts. Think People, a celebration of just how amazing people can be. Think Planet, conversations with thought leaders on important environmental issues. Subscribe to Think Radio Presents on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever else you get great content. And don't forget to help us spread the word by liking our social media channels and sharing the content we post. We're grateful to have you in the conversation on Think Radio Presents. We've got a great conversation today. I'm really excited about it. In fact, there's so much to talk about that I think we'll probably wind up with 2 episodes out of this particular discussion. But first, I want to tell you that here at Think Radio Presents, we absolutely love what we do. We get up every day excited. In fact, sometimes I can't believe that I get to sit and have great conversations with such interesting and amazing people. And we love bringing it to you on YouTube and every podcast outlet we can find. But I want you to know that to do that is an expensive and time-consuming thing to do. In order to produce these shows and get them to you, we absolutely depend on the support of people exactly like you. For as little as $2 a month, you can make a big difference and help us keep the lights on. You do that by going to our website, thinkradiopresents.com, and finding the link to Patreon, which is a great, reliable organization that does exactly this, helps link supporters with artists and other content providers like ourselves. So thank you for listening, and thank you for being a supporter of Think Radio Presents. And now, on to the fun stuff. My guest today is entrepreneur Karen Hoskin. Hoskin owns or co-owns Montanya Distillers with her husband Bryce, where they make high mountain rum. And that's no exaggeration because the distillery sits at almost 9,000 feet in Crested Butte, Colorado. In the company's first 6 years, Montanya Rums won 19 gold and silver medals for excellence in international competitions. And in just a decade, they grew from mostly local and regional sales to now shipping their rums to 42 states and 7 countries. If you've ever enjoyed Montanya rum yourself, you won't be surprised at this remarkable success. It's really good. But really most impressive, and why I'm very excited to bring this conversation to you today, is something that you won't see in the usual statistics. That is Montanya's commitment to full spectrum resilience in just about every aspect of their business. In fact, they've just become the first distillery in Colorado to be named a certified B-Corp. And that's the 3rd distillery in the U.S. That's a distinction and achievement we'll talk about more in a moment. That philosophy also extends to a kind of an activist stance on fair wages, workplace diversity, community philanthropy, and more. And lastly, through it all, Hoskin and her team have disproved the idea that you can't build a successful business in a small town in an out-of-the-way place. And that's really good news for entrepreneurs everywhere. Karen, I'm so pleased to have you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
As I said earlier, we've got a lot to talk about, a lot of ground to cover. But I don't want to jump into the story in the middle. I'd like to start by hearing your origin story. Who are you and where do you come from? I mean, that's such an impressive list of things to be able to say about your business in a short period of time. Where did it start? Where do you come from?
Sure. I am originally from Maine. So I started my career after college in Massachusetts, really focusing on entrepreneurship almost from the very beginning. So one of my first jobs was with an organization in Arizona that was just beginning, and I was one of the first people on the ground kind of bringing it to life. And then I moved on to having my own businesses for a good 12 years before I even started thinking about Montanya Distillers.
What sort of business did you start with?
I was a graphic designer and web designer for a long time. So back really in the days when websites were just becoming a thing, I was building some of the very first websites for businesses that they had ever had,
Wow.
which was an interesting time to be part of that world. There was so much to learn. So I've been self-taught in almost everything I do from day one. I don't have a degree in graphic design. I don't have any sort of computer science background. I have a degree in comparative religion from Williams College in Massachusetts. So everything I've done has really grown out of my own passions.
Okay. So right away, we're talking an eclectic mix of things that you've done in your life, comparative literature to web design. And also, I will point out, this idea of being self-taught is a theme that has followed you all the way through.
Absolutely.
So web design, what next?
So I really was doing these huge projects for other people's entrepreneurial companies. I was designing their logos and their marketing campaigns. I designed their trade show booths and their catalogs, their websites, obviously, and I did advertising for them, developed messaging and marketing and branding, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. But literally at the end of every project, I would sort of hand everything over and say, here you go. And I'd watch these people build these dream companies, which I loved being part of that. But at the end, I would always feel a little bit empty, like I had just put all of my resources into something that I didn't get to keep.
Sure, they walked away with your baby.
Yeah, so that was really the moment where I woke up one morning, literally woke up one morning, and I said to my husband, I don't think I can do this anymore. I want to keep something at the end of the day. I want to use all these skills that I have to build my own brand. And we were at the time sitting on a beach in Belize. We both are very hardworking kind of entrepreneur types. So there's a big work hard, play hard ethos in our family. And we were drinking rum, which has been a passion of mine for almost 30 years. And, my husband said, what do you want to do next? And I said, I want to make rum. And that was back in 2008. So it was the beginning of kind of climbing onto this freight train, and it just took off at high speed. And I joke occasionally and say it feels like my legs are sort of dangling off the back sometimes, like I'm holding on for dear life and it's going without me. But generally, it's been one of the most fun things I've done. And I literally use every single skill I have every single day.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's sort of the definition of entrepreneurism, right? Is that you better have a basket full of skills that you can use every single day.
It's true.
But back up just a second. What do you mean that rum had been a passion of yours for 30 years? I mean, I get it. People like rum, but they don't often say things like that.
Sure. It's true. I mean, when I was getting into rum early in my life, it was not a thing. Nobody that I knew was excited about rum. I literally didn't know of any pundits or, folks that were well known in the rum world. It was really hard back then to get a decent rum in the United States. So my passion for it developed much through my own travel. It started in India, believe it or not, with a rum that I tasted on a beach in India called Old Monk. It was a vestige of the British Raj time in India.
And it was locally made?
It was made outside of Delhi, India.
Yeah.
And I fell in love. I still, just about a week and a half ago, I had a cocktail made with Old Monk rum in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's very much out there. It's not my favorite anymore, simply because my own palate has evolved, and it's a little too sweet and a little too butterscotchy now for my palate. But at the time when I was in India traveling, it was just exactly the perfect thing because I can't drink beer. I'm celiac. There's so much that I can't drink or that makes me have a migraine the next day. Good rum has never done that to me. So I've been known among my friends for a long time as if you invite Karen to a party or a dinner gathering, she'll make rum cocktails. I used to do that a lot more. Now it feels a little bit like work.
Well, what are you doing on Friday then? Because that sounds pretty good to me. Yeah, and rum has sort of and maybe I'm just speaking for myself here, but until I started to learn more about what you and other craft distillers are doing, I would have said rum was kind of a swill sort of drink. I mean, it had that reputation.
For good reason.
And what are those reasons in your mind?
So historically, many rums that were available in the United States are factory-produced rums. So they're made in incredibly high volumes on massive stills that are not craft-focused in the method of the still. They're just simply being monitored, often by computers or by, in these massive batches. And there's no way for a human being to be like, let me taste that and see if it's delicious. So what comes out of the still is what you get.
Yeah.
And if the cuts aren't made properly by the still itself or by the computer that's measuring alcohol by volume and temperature, then that spirit is going to be kind of bland.
So it occurs to me that we could describe that same process to a lot of things that are mass-produced.
Absolutely.
I mean, our bread, our name it.
Cheese, ice cream,
lots of things.
Chocolate, you name it. It's so true.
The whole idea is to just pump out a bunch of it.
But the magic with rum comes in this tiny little point during the distillation process where you transition from the heads to the hearts and from the hearts to the tails. And people who are familiar with distilling know about those things. And if you don't catch that tiny little transition where all the flavor exists, then you have something that either tastes more like vodka or it tastes terrible because it has heads in it, which have some really terrible congeners, some flavors in them that we don't like.
And the pirates would still drink it, but no one else on Earth would want it.
People on the train, maybe, a hobo catching a ride on a train comes off sort of blind and, half dead. That's what they were drinking, was the heads of various spirits that they could get their hands on.
This is what you must be referring to on your website when you say that the process of distilling rum is part science but mostly art.
Yes.
Is this what you're talking about? And if you're standing there trying to teach somebody how to do this, and I realize you couldn't do that in an afternoon, but what would you tell them about practicing the art of distillery?
Sure. Well, I think if we were a huge company with huge column stills, then I wouldn't be able to teach them anything about the art. I would only be teaching them about the science. But because of the stills we use, which are these beautiful alembic copper pot stills from Portugal that were hand-hammered for us, they're a very old-school tradition. They're literally the oldest tradition of distilling in the world. Back before there was even metal, they were making this type of still out of ceramic. So we use a particular type of still. That makes a big difference. But really it's about what is happening in the process. the heat under the still, so we use an open flame. That's really rare anymore in the distilling world because of strict fire codes and people wanting to distill in downtown Chicago or places like that. The fire codes have gotten so crazy that you can't, in many places, distill with an open flame anymore. We do that. So I would be talking with someone about the flame under the still, what the temperature is, how vigorous is the boil going on inside the still. I'd be talking about our sugar cane and the way it's interacting with, the ambient temperature in the room and how vibrant is the yeast. And in the barrel house, I would be talking about, the fluctuations in temperature. There'd be so many different things that are human scale that people have to monitor and be aware of. And that doesn't happen in a factory.
So it's kind of a Zen thing to do in the sense that you have to be present.
That is exactly right. And it's something that comes up for me a lot because in my position, I can't really be zen and present with the stills. There are too many distractions. I'm managing 25 people on our staff and our national sales platforms, and it's really one of my greatest sadnesses in the business is that I often don't get to do some of those original tasks, bottling the rum, putting my hands on every single bottle that leaves our facility, doing all the graphic design and web design myself. I get a lot more help now out of necessity.
I imagine you would have to. But we've gotten ahead of the story a little bit because I want to go back to that moment on the beach in Belize. And you say, I want to make something that's mine. And Bryce, your husband, says, what? And you say, rum. What was that moment like? I mean, did that just come out of left field? And describe the look on his face. I would love to have been there to see it.
Well, interestingly, he wasn't surprised at all for a couple of reasons. One is that we had just been having a conversation about Marie Sharp. So anybody who's been to Belize understands that there's this very famous female entrepreneur in Belize named Marie Sharp. She makes hot sauces out of carrot, which is all grown naturally, and habanero and things that are grown in Belize. And there's a bottle of it on every single restaurant table in the entire country. And now they sell it outside the country. And I was just really inspired by her. It's like, to some extent, it almost doesn't matter what you make, as long as you make something beautiful that is something your community can take pride in, and you make it with sort of an obsessive attention to the details and the quality. And I thought, gosh, I could probably make purple toilet paper. And if I did it with enough quality and passion and story, it would probably be okay. So rum just happened to be something that I had spent a lot of time educating myself about, learning about how it was made and who the players were, getting to know the industry. And I felt like it was something that I could really get excited about. Where if someone had said, hey, Karen, you should start a brewery, I would have said, I can't even drink beer. How would I even know if it was good? Gin, same problem. I'm allergic to juniper. I'd be saying, I can't even taste my own product. So I wanted to make something that I would always feel good about being the number one quality control person. Yeah,
well, something you cared about, something you knew about. Let me ask the same question. Did it surprise you that that's what came out of your mouth when you were asked, what do you want to do?
A little bit. I look back now from the bird's eye view of 10 years, and I think how little I knew. Literally, I knew nothing about how spirits are sold. I knew nothing about the economic engine behind it. Craft spirits were really brand new. There weren't a lot of. We were the 5th craft distiller in Colorado. There are now more than 70. We were in the first 200 craft distillers in the United States. There are now, I think, more than 1,500. So I didn't have a lot of peers. I didn't have a lot of advisors. There were no women.
No, YouTube's videos that you could Google on how to do this.
Actually, the American Distilling Institute, even then, had an amazing
Really?
online platform where
Cool.
they had filmed every educational session they had ever done and made it available to membership.
Wow.
So we did just sit through hours and hours of video learning about everything from how to make spirits to how to sell them.
Well, we've had entrepreneurs in here, and when I ask them the question, okay, you're going to talk to potential entrepreneurs, people that are sitting at their kitchen table right now, sort of figuring out what it is they want to do. What's rule number one? And sometimes the answer we get is you have to pick something that you know really well. But that wasn't true in your case. You didn't know this at all.
No, I really didn't. And I had read a book fairly recently that if you choose something that you're too passionate about or that's too much of a love for you, you can sort of ruin it for yourself. Like I read a great book, and there was this woman who was really into making pies. She loved to make pies for all her friends, and she created this pie making business. And all of a sudden she would wake up in the morning and be like, ugh, pies. And so for me, the reality is rum was at the time just a small one of my passions among 1,000. And so I was able to turn it into a career and a business without losing kind of my life to it, which was great.
Well, and you said to yourself at that moment, I want to make rum. And you crossed some sort of threshold and said, that's what we're going to do. But you set some other goals. At least those goals are present now. I'm curious to know if they were present right from the beginning. Things like you wanted all of your ingredients to come from producers and suppliers in the United States. You wanted to be environmentally responsible in everything you did. You wanted to support equitable labor practices, all of those things. Did you bring that to the table right from the beginning?
Yes. I realized, because someone was asking me about this recently, and I thought, I guess I can't really do it any other way. And I haven't really thought about that very much until recently, but I just have to act out this business in a way that makes me able to sleep at night and makes me feel good and confident about what I'm doing and who I'm doing it with and how I'm doing it and how it affects everyone around me, including my community. And I think that's probably comes out of my nonprofit organizational origins back when I was first out of college. I'm not sure exactly, but I definitely, from the very beginning, it was important to us to do adaptive reuse of buildings. So we didn't want to be one of those distilleries that came into a community and just built these huge facilities, because there are so many facilities and so many buildings and so many things that were not being utilized completely. And so we've done that again and again with a number of buildings. From the very first building we occupied, we've never constructed a distillery or a tasting room like most of my colleagues in the business.
Wow, that's an interesting extension of the 3 R's that we all heard about, recycle, reuse, and reduce. You're talking about reused buildings, even to that level.
Absolutely. I just drove down Grand Avenue in Grand Junction, and I was so devastated by the fact that there's been this huge migration of all those big box stores out to a different highway location, and they've left behind this road filled with big box stores that nobody wants to use because it's just not on the right street. And that, to me, is environmentally so irresponsible. So for a company to say, yes, we are an environmentally responsible company, and then leave behind a blighted building and go build something brand new in another location because it's the cool kids block.
Yeah.
That to me is not environmental practice. And then with people, same thing. It's like I want to be able to look them in the eye every day and feel like I'm helping them to achieve their own goals.
Particularly, you're talking about your employees.
Exactly. Yeah. I want them to be able to buy a home or to have health insurance when they get sick or ill, when they get injured on the ski slopes or on their mountain bikes. And I want to be sure that their lives are fulfilled as opposed to sacrifices that they're making along the way for me to be successful. I've always had more of a crowd approach, like let's do this all together, and hopefully at the end of the day we can all succeed.
Well, I think that there are a fair number of business owners, particularly in the startup world, that would say to you, I want all of that too, but I can't figure out how to make it work.
Sure.
The numbers, when I sit down at the kitchen table and start, poking the calculator, it never feels like I can actually make those commitments and do those things. What was different about your approach that you were able to make it stick?
Well, I think, and I've observed this again and again, I did it at my own, Bryce and I did it at our own personal sacrifice. So many of my colleagues in the craft distilling industry, they pad their own pockets first, and then they begin a practice of passing some of that down the line. So you'll see and this is not everybody, but you'll see an owner who's driving a Range Rover and talking about how they can't provide any benefits to their employees because, it's just too expensive. And I was willing throughout my 10 years so far in this business and in my business before to give up some things, make less money, drive a Toyota, whatever it happened to be, to try to bring everybody else up simultaneously and from the start. Because the reality is you don't magically reach some point where you can suddenly start doing it. It has to be, it is a sacrifice, and it's often so stressful and so hard. There have been so many moments when I have worried if we were going to make payroll or if we were going to, be able to pay the rent in the off season, or just, we started in Silverton and now we're in Crested Butte. The off seasons are long for our restaurant and tasting room operations, and so there have been incredibly stressful moments that maybe I could have avoided, but what I've gotten instead is this incredible cadre of people that I work with who become our brand ambassadors because they love what we do and who we are, and they're proud to work with us.
Yeah, and an interesting way to look at that is, had you not taken care of your people right from the beginning, you might have just been dealing with a whole nother set of problems.
Exactly. I think we would have been less likely to succeed and had more financial stress than, buying them ski passes, our full-timers and managers that we provide a ski pass benefit to. Like many of my colleagues, even in Crested Butte, but in ski town-based distilleries or whatever, say, I can't believe you do that. That's thousands and thousands of dollars in one check for a benefit. How do you do that? I'm like, that's why they're here. They're in Crested Butte because they love this natural environment. They could make so much more money living in downtown San Francisco, but they're here because they love being outside. And so the best benefit I can give them is a way to be outside without as much financial stress.
Yeah. So. And not only does that benefit your employees, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it benefits you. I mean, dealing with disaffected and unhappy and employees, people who are looking for the next opportunity all the time, is a real drain on a business.
It's such a drain.
Why do you think that idea seems to have such a hard time taking root in the mainstream? Why is it so unusual?
I think it has to do with your horizon line. I think there are a lot of people whose horizon line is like this month's financials or this quarter's financials or this year's financials even. And my horizon line is so far in the future. It's an aspect of a craft distilling business versus, say, making yogurt. Of course, if you're making something that you can sell tomorrow, it's a really different horizon line. But for me, my horizon line that I'm looking at is always so far in the future that one expense over here to provide a life insurance benefit or a disability benefit. I had an employee who did a Superman off of his bicycle on Elk Avenue in Crested Butte early summer. And luckily, he had not only an accident benefit, but he also had short-term disability. So he was getting paid. And I had another employee this summer who broke a femur. They can become part of this benefits package that is tapped into what they're doing every day. But I think a lot of people are like, I gotta have good quarterlies so that I can get a new, VC firm, a new angel investor to come in and invest in my company. And so I gotta pad the quarterly P&L. And I'm like, I'd rather have a P&L, that doesn't look so good and be taking care of the human side of our business, the human capital, than have a fabulous P&L and have, my employees going bankrupt because they got injured and couldn't work and had medical expenses. And it just, to me, it's a no-brainer. But I know it's not. It's actually, I see it going the other way, very much away from a lot of those practices that were really part of life back in the 40s and 50s. Businesses were families. They took really good care of their people for the long term. And I see it as just now this crazy cutthroat scene out there.
Yeah. Well, is there anything that you see that gives you hope that that pendulum maybe, if it's not reached its extreme yet, maybe it's slowing down and thinking about coming back?
Not nationally. I see it really going the other direction. But I do see that if we take the right approach, it gives companies that are doing it an opportunity to really distinguish themselves. So the B-Corp certification would be an example I would give of a way for a consumer to say, I don't want to buy things from a company that is paying, Amazon just finally decided to pay their employees a reasonable wage. They've been paying people horribly for a really long time. And so if there's some third-party way to know about that, which the B-Corp is, you can go on their website, you can use the directory, you can see how they scored in different categories from environment to social commitments to their employees. And you can, I call it shopping the B-Corp. It's like, go figure out, if you want to buy a pair of socks, go figure out who's B-Corp certified. That's how I do it. And buy those socks, because then you know that all the suppliers are responsible, they're responsible, and you can see where their priorities lie in their profile.
And so perhaps the answer to the question that I just posed about hope and the pendulum, you only begin to see the hope if you look at a small scale.
Exactly.
Where people are making choices like you're describing.
Right.
Entrepreneurs are making choices like you're describing, but we don't really see that in the news. We don't see that on a national scale. You have to kind of drill down to be able to get a look.
But I do see that the generation after mine, so if I'm 50, people between the ages of 20 and 40, let's say, are shopping really differently. They want to know more about the producers. They're more skeptical about the big advertising. They want to have a little bit of information about where it came from, how it was made. They'd love an opportunity to meet the maker. And I see that as a trend. So that's going to push demand up through, ideally, to the company level, where the companies are going to start to say, oh, I guess I better be more like my consumers want me to be.
What
and
a concept.
Take care of things. Yeah.
Right?
I wish it went the other way, but it doesn't. It's usually consumer driven.
Yeah, well, there's real power in that because I think you're right. Consumers are beginning to see things differently. You've been listening to part 1 of my interview with Karen Hoskin, co-owner of Montanya Distillers. Tune in next week for the rest of the story on Think Radio Presents Think Business. Thanks for watching. Join us next week for another great conversation on Think Radio Presents Think Business.